Hello and welcome to the latest edition of the Becca's Talking Podcast. I am Tom Becca. Thank you for joining us. Every Tuesday at 10 a.m. we release a brand new podcast of interesting people, just everyday people with interesting stories to tell, and today is no exception. I'll get to that in a second, but first, I want to say that the podcast is brought to you by the fine folks at Havana Garage. Havana Garage in the Old Market. It's just a good place to go after work for a cocktail, relax, or maybe you've got an event you want to go into downtown, a concert at the CHI Center, or maybe a play out at the Orpheum, or maybe something at the Holland, or just a nice dinner in the Old Market. A lot of great restaurants there. Yeah, top it off with a visit to Havana Garage in the Old Market. And I found out as I was there the other night, and I guess I should have known this, but I didn't know this. They've got a little room downstairs, kind of a private little room. So let's say you want to do maybe a team building exercise from work, or maybe a meeting after work, but you don't want a lot of other people overhearing what you're saying. Yeah, just let them know. You go into that little room downstairs and have a cigar, have a cocktail, and take care of business. Havana Garage in the Old Market. Tell them you heard about it on the Becca's Talking Podcast. Okay, so before we begin today, I need to do a little bit of a disclaimer. Besides doing the podcast, I am also a realtor with Better Homes and Gardens Real Estate, the Good Life Group. And my guest today is Tim Reeder, who is pretty much the Good Life Group and the broker, one of the brokers there at Better Homes and Gardens. And the reason we're doing this podcast is in November, we were going to the Veterans Day Parade in Bellevue. And you and I got into a conversation about what you're involved with Old Omaha. Mm-hmm. Okay, now, I'm Old Omaha. What do you mean by Old Omaha?
Well, a couple of things. I can also help differentiate what you were trying to say. So I used to run a real estate team called the Good Life Group, and it was all about relationship marketing and taking really good care of your clients, and they would become active walking, talking billboards for you. So I'm co-owner, co-broker of Better Homes and Gardens Real Estate. Okay. So I love saying that because that's something I'm really excited about, a really great passion I have about running, helping other agents become really great agents. So then on a personal level, I love history. I love Omaha history. I love Omaha's houses. And I've been very blessed to be able to merge my specializing in old historic homes as a realtor in my hobby as the history of Omaha.
I drive all around town, and I will constantly see something going up and say, now what used to be there? Yep. And as I even noticed, like somewhere, like in the Blackstone area, and that I've noticed that they're tearing down some of the old houses. Mm-hmm. But I guess first of all, why is it important to save these houses? Maybe that'd be a good place to start.
That's a hard. The answer is all over the place, and there's a lot of opinions involved. But I will say that at the end of the day, I'm all for progress, and we need housing. We have a massive shortage of housing across the country, let alone here in Omaha. So we need more homes. And as the urban core expands, and we have the streetcar and all these other great things that make our city more on par with other cities, we need that. However, we also I don't believe we should be erasing all the history and all the fabric and all the visual architecture of our city unnecessarily. And so you brought up those houses on the corner of 38th and Dodge. Right. Those are a perfect example of the three of them. And then there was a mid-century building behind them. And they were all in reasonably good condition. Okay, there's people all over the place that will say, oh, they were terrible, they need to be torn down. That's opinions. Anything can be saved. Now, that doesn't mean it should be. I don't mean that. But those properties were actually really good properties that visually added to the culture and the style of our area. So I believe tearing those down and building a ugly new building was not necessarily in the best interest of the city. Now, do I think that they shouldn't be building apartment buildings? No. I think we should. But I think I think we should be a little bit more creative or adaptable to using the spaces that are there. Anyway.
Yeah. Now, I live in Dundee. I've got an old home. I think my home's like 110 years old or something like that. So I live in an old house. I love the old houses, but they are a lot of upkeep, a lot of work. And that, so why are people interested in that? I mean, in other words, when you have clients, do you have people saying, "I'm really looking for an old house"? Mm-hmm. Or do they just, does everybody want to live in one of the new buildings out in, Elkhorn or Bennington? I mean, that area is booming.
It is.
That area is booming. Why would they want to live in an older house in the Jocelyn Castle area or Blackstone or Dundee?
So all homes need work. And there's this misnomer that people say, I'm going to buy a newer home. I'm not going to have to worry about anything. Do you know a home now that's built now is the longevity is much shorter than the ones that were built 100, 120 years ago. So the truth is that buying any home and saying I'm not going to have to worry about anything is ridiculous. I love specializing in old homes and historic homes because whenever I'm helping somebody buy or sell one, they're never looking for a home that's perfect. They're looking for a home that has character, has style. I'll get to your point in just a moment. But also they know it's going to need some work and it's going to need some love, and they're going to put their imprint on it. I love that when you put money into a home in the inner city, that it often is going to be worth more than what you spent on it. The return is actually really good. Our city is a great city, and we are 20 to 30 years behind every other city when it comes to keeping up with the parts of town that were at once abandoned. So right now you look at Northeast Omaha. It's booming. People on a regular basis, I won't go there, I won't go there. We don't even have to go about why they won't go there. Drive there now, and you will see that is a part of the city that it's wonderful.
Well, there's some gorgeous houses up in the Florence area.
Oh, there are. There are. Yeah. But I'm talking about also what's happening now with just the revitalization. The money that's going into Northeast Omaha is incredible. Mm-hmm. 24th Street is going through a massive resurgence, and it all should have for a variety of reasons. But also, you still have some of the beautiful old homes that are still there. But there's just, it's close to downtown. The proximity is great. Anyway, I'm sorry. Your question is why? When people are buying old homes, it's not just necessarily about the house. Yeah, a house has history. It's got some character, but it's also about the area. The area is typically established. There's people that are there that have been there for 2 years, been there 5 years, been there for 40 years. You also have trees. You have trees that fill in the whole area. There is so much history in an older area, and it's ongoing. Yes, you can move out to a new area, and somebody hasn't been there very long. The house hasn't been there very long. I love the history of the city, history of the streets, history of everything.
I'm sort of in the same feeling towards that sort of a thing. Because as a matter of fact, when we were going to the parade, you asked for my address and typed it into a website you have to start giving me all the history here. I didn't know that my house used to have a garage until it burned down. Back, I don't know, in the 20s or something. So going back to the history, you found all this information about my house that I had no idea, mm-hmm. and I found that fascinating. Mm-hmm. And you talk about just the climate, the culture, and the maybe just, for lack of a better term, the vibe of an old neighborhood, mm-hmm. an older neighborhood. It does offer something. Mm-hmm. I have a nephew he's in the early 30s now, but when he was probably, I would say maybe 10, 12 years old, something like that, he came to visit, and I took him out to breakfast one morning, and we went to Lisa's Radio Cafe. Mm. And the fact that he was born and raised in Phoenix, in a suburb of Phoenix, actually, so everything that he was always around was new.
Yeah.
So I took him to Lisa's Radio Cafe, and, he was like just amazed. I'm like, Uncle Tom, man, we got nothing like this in Phoenix. And you're right, because Phoenix is not an older town. If you do have something like that, maybe an old Indian adobe house or something like that. But generally speaking, you don't have those in Phoenix.
That's true. One of the things I'll say that kind of was a differentiator, and it also goes kind of what you just said about Phoenix. So I love Omaha. I love Omaha's history. I'm not from here. I moved here in 1998. And then when I moved here, I quickly started to fall in love with the old parts of town, the history of the city. And I started to learn about the houses and the streets and who lived there and all that kind of stuff. Well, as I got into it and I really got into it, it got more exciting. It wasn't that long ago I went to Europe. And I was in France. I went to all over these areas, and the history was extraordinary. And it was really Notre Dame right there. It's something big in the news right now. I got a tour of the outside of it, and I loved all the history over there. there's so much history, I couldn't wrap my head around it. And then when I came back home, all of a sudden I realized, oh, we're not that old. We don't have that much cool history. We can, even Europeans, French people can laugh about it. But I'm able to wrap my head around it. And I'm able to wrap my head around the streets and the houses and everything. If you say an address right now, I can pretty much imagine which house that is in my head. I couldn't do that, if I were somewhere else. And I just have loved being part of the culture of Omaha, and I want to continue to proliferate it.
You talk about that. I'm of Czech descent, right? So I'm in Prague. First time I went to Prague, I'm there and I'm in a gift shop. And I'm buying a few little souvenirs, as one does on vacation. And the woman behind the counter says, "Oh, where are you from?" And I said, of course she said it with a heavy Czech accent, which I can't do. She goes, where are you from? And I said, "Oh, Omaha, Nebraska." She goes, "Oh, Omaha." I said, "How old is the oldest building in Omaha?" And I said, "Oh, probably about 150 years old." And she just started laughing.
Yeah.
Now, I know that she probably plays that with every tourist that comes through the store, but it's true. It's true. I mean, you go and you look at some of these old homes in Europe. You mentioned France, but same thing is true with the Czech Republic. Same thing is true with all of Eastern Europe. And I was up in Scotland not too long ago, and different architecture, but the same sort of thing. The history in that, which we always sort of tend to think that newer is better, and I don't necessarily believe that. I believe that you gotta preserve your history, and you got to preserve these buildings, which brings me to work that you have done or working with Jocelyn Castle. Because at one time, Jocelyn Castle was just sort of an afterthought, and now that neighborhood is really starting to develop and really starting to be a destination.
It is, absolutely. Now, I cannot take any credit for any of that, but since you brought it up, my piece is, I am currently the president of Preserve Omaha. Preserve Omaha is Omaha's leading nonprofit for preservation and restoration in the city. It has been around since 1965 under the name Landmarks. And so we've had many iterations, many name changes. Before us, we were called Restoration Exchange Omaha, but now we're Preserve Omaha. And under my leadership, we have moved our office back into the castle. So Preserve Omaha, once when it was Landmarks Inc., was co-responsible for helping save the castle, because the castle was deemed to be torn down. They were planning on putting a freeway right through it and a lot of other amazing historic properties. So Landmarks Inc., as well as some of these other organizations, did stop that in 1965. So under my leadership, we moved back into the castle, and the castle is it's a thriving business right now. It is basically it's a nonprofit that does events, wedding venues, those kinds of things. It's expensive to maintain that property, so they could always use more business, by all means. But now the whole Jocelyn Castle neighborhood has become an arts district. So that now means that so much of the Jocelyn Castle, all the way up to the cathedral and all the neighborhood around it, all the way to Saddle Creek to the west, that's all part of an arts district area. So you should be following the Jocelyn Castle and what it's got going on.
And if you've never been inside the Jocelyn Castle, or even on the grounds of Jocelyn Castle, I highly recommend it. They do offer tours. They do offer tours, and you can go and see the intricate woodwork that is there, and the history and the garden and everything that is there that would just be astronomical. I mean, you couldn't build something like that today.
You could not.
Warren Buffett could, but the rest of us probably not.
Yeah.
Build something like that today. And if you haven't taken the tour, if you haven't had that chance, I highly recommend it, because it's the history, and also the history of just the Jocelyn family, George and Sarah Jocelyn, and what they did and how they lived, and the story of. The pretty much like the original Omaha man cave, which is in the basement, which you really can't get to, but the legendary
unless
stuff
you know
about
somebody.
That. Yeah, unless you know somebody, unless them know somebody, or nobody's watching, and I think they do open it up once in a while for tours.
What they do. There's
the basement.
There's a bowling alley in the basement. The family had a bowling alley.
Yeah.
One lane bowling alley. That the legacy they left behind was absolutely extraordinary.
And if memory serves me with Jocelyn Castle, there's a staircase that goes from like that basement man cave up to like the maid's quarters, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Old George. Oh, he was a hell of a guy.
Yeah.
Okay. So what you mentioned now you're part of Preserve Omaha and that. How big of an organization is that? And if people want to get involved with it, how do they do that?
So Preserve Omaha, if you'd like to look that up, preserveomaha.org. We are Omaha's nonprofit, all about preservation. Actually, our motto is we recognize, celebrate, and advocate for Omaha's historic places. So we know that we don't have the funds or money to save a building. We can't go in there and buy it and restore it. But what we can do is we can help you, the people out in the public, find out the history about the property, whether or not it's historic. We can help you determine whether or not you're eligible for any type of grants or public funds. We can help you celebrate and point out, just show to the public the great parts of the history of your building. And then so our goal is just to advocate for the public places.
Well, you mentioned historic. Now, if you do buy an historic building, that's a whole other kettle of worms, right? If you're trying to remodel it, if you're trying to improve it, right?
That's an extremely common misnomer. No. First of all, whether or not a home or a building is registered as a historic building is one thing. And also the laws in Nebraska are very, very flex. So the truth is that you can buy a building or a house and do almost anything you want to it. There are a few areas. There are a few Omaha historic districts like Bemis Park, North 38th Street, or in the bulk of the Old Market. Those do fall under a specific category where you have to adhere to certain rules and paint colors and windows and that kind of stuff. But it's such a small pocket within. But you look in Blackstone District where they're building the giant building at 38th and Jackson, or 38th and Farnham. They tore down about 5 homes that were listed on the National Register of Historic Places. So it does not, listed on the National Register does not protect you.
Really? Okay. I guess I knew somebody that did some renovation of a place in the Old Market, and I know they had to go. It was a historic
They
building.
were part of that smaller group I just mentioned.
Yeah. They had to go through. So that's where I got that idea that if you're doing that,
that's the most strict it gets in our city, which is really not that much.
Speaking about the Old Market, let me do another plug here for Havana Garage. Hey, how's that for a segue?
That is.
In the Old Market. Havana Garage, which, you think about what Omaha would be like without the Old Market. Just the history, and especially on a summer day. On a summer day, you see the horse and carriages, and actually, I guess they're still out in the wintertime too, but, you see them walking down the street and, clopping down the street and that. And it's just, kind of a step back in time. Make sure you visit Havana Garage in the Old Market. Tell them you heard about it on the Becca's Talking podcast. So as we move forward, are there things on the horizon as far as some of the older buildings in town that you're trying to save, or you're trying to stop from destruction, or anything that might be on the chopping block?
Well, yes and no. I mean, there's things I can't talk about. I can't point things out because then it becomes a problem. The reality is that we as Preserve Omaha, if I could wear the hat for a moment, we just try to raise awareness when we know that there's some building that's in jeopardy. And we would love to continue that and have lots of volunteers to help celebrate, have parties in, and even like if there's a building that's going to get torn down, let's just celebrate it, see it, take pictures of it before it gets torn down. Because we all know at the end of the day, every building around us, including the Jocelyn Castle, everything will be gone. Nothing lasts forever. So it's crazy for us to pretend like some house or building and we're going to spend billions of dollars or whatever trying to save something. Yeah. No, we want to celebrate it while it's here. So I think I personally am working on something in Florence. So I recently purchased a property. I run a nonprofit called Retree Omaha. Retree Omaha is all about retreeing our common streets, that the trees go down first as the streets get widened, houses become rentals, buildings become vacant or turn into commercial buildings, and all of us drive down these major streets and lose our trees. So for years I've been planting trees along our major streets. So with that nonprofit, I just bought a property in Florence. It's a historic property at 6327 Florence Boulevard. It's on just under 2 acres of land, and it's one of Omaha's most historic pieces of property. It's got a home that was built in 1869. It was officers' quarters, building number 15 on Fort Omaha campus. Fort Omaha, pardon me. And in 1899, when Fort Omaha decided they wanted to get rid of the wood structures, they wanted to build brick structures, they sold all these houses off. Well, this one was purchased by a couple of brothers. It was cut into 2 pieces, and it was pulled by oxen to 6327 Florence Boulevard, and it was their farm for decades. It was the Grenville brothers' fruit farm and orchard, I believe, is what it was. They built a barn there. It was this great property. And many of us in the Omaha history lovers area have driven by this many, many times. The person has been there for many decades recently, as the house is starting to fall apart around them. That just happens. And I bought the property through Retree Omaha, and I'm going through a process of restoring the house, restoring the barn, and then turning the land into some type of a public space where we can share in Omaha's history.
You talk about, that house. And as you were talking, I was thinking about, and just like I said, I'm a Dundee guy, and we record these in Blackstone, so this is sort of the area that I know, the old market area that I know. But as I think about it, you think about what's happening in Little Italy, and the old Bohemian area. What's happening there with a lot of their development. You talked about South Omaha, the culture and the history there with the old meatpacking plant, and some of these buildings that I think we still need to keep.
Yeah.
And they've repurposed them, just much like, the meatpacking plant, has got offices now. And are there condos in there too?
No condos.
No condos.
But
just offices, yeah. But they've repurposed that, and the same thing is true with, some of the buildings like up in North Omaha and that. So, I think it's important to keep this stuff. But I'm an old guy. I sort of have a nostalgia for some of that stuff. Do, the young kids, when they're starting out, when they're looking to buy their first home, are they looking to buy something like this? Is there an interest in the older homes for, maybe second or third time home buyers, maybe not even first, but, second or third time home buyers? Or do they just say once they reach, 25, they want to move out west?
Not necessarily anything. I mean, the truth is, sometimes history prevails and they're just really involved in history and that's where they want to live. Sometimes it's just a matter of convenience and you happen to be a student at UNMC and want to live close. So it's all over the place, to be quite honest. You go out into New England, that area, you're going to pay a premium to live in a historic home.
Right.
Here, you're not. So here, if it is historic, that's just an afterthought. And it's a little sad. At the same time, again, as one of Omaha's leading preservationists, I'm a realist as well. And I know that it's at the end of the day, it is just real estate. And but that's all I can hope is that people just recognize it, document it, celebrate it for its character, its style, and its history. And if it has to move on, whatever that is, that's okay.
And that's it, because I know, as a long-time resident here, there have been times, like you mentioned, they talked about tearing down Jocelyn Castle. They talked about tearing down the Orpheum. They talked about tearing down the Durham Museum. They've talked about, we look what happened at Jobbers Canyon.
Yeah.
Which
we've lost far more than we've saved.
Yeah.
Do you know there are homes that were in Omaha that were much grander than the Jocelyn Castle.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And by the way, if you ever get a chance, go and do some research on some of the history of Omaha. Because we have this image of Omaha being this lily white Midwestern town. Oh shucks, howdy neighbor kind of a thing, right? I mean, that's a lot. But if you look into the history of this place, this was a dirty little
It really
town,
was,
man.
yeah.
With organized crime and Anna Wilson and all the stories about that. There's a couple of good books that you can get out of the Durham Museum about this sort of a thing, and I would recommend those.
If I may say, to add to that point, if any of you know what redlining is a legal term where back in, I'm not going to say dates, 50, 60 years ago, they were literal red lines on a map, red lines, and that would be in that area. That's where money was not spent and not invested. Businesses you couldn't get a home loan, and you can imagine what those areas were. Omaha had the biggest redlined area in the country, which means that there was this giant swath. We know it now. That's why Northeast Omaha is still suffering the consequences of redlining. And now there is an exhibit at UNO all about our redlined areas and how bad that was. But that's also why we're seeing an exact opposite of that right now and a giant regrowth into...
Well, correct me if I'm wrong. As I understand it, the hotel there on 16th Street downtown, that was built basically to stop some of the easy transportation between North and South Omaha.
Yep. The 16th Street was the main artery from downtown to North Omaha. By the way, that was also the main artery for bootlegging, which happens to connect back to the property I just bought in Florence. So that area, where all the bootleggers, Tom Dennison, all that, there were these tunnels that went down to 16th Street, and that's where they got the alcohol, ran right down downtown.
Yeah. Even if you're not interested in old homes and the like, I highly recommend you do some research into the history of this city. Because, it's fun. It ain't all pretty. It ain't all pretty, but there's a part of it. I mean, you mentioned the bootlegging and all that. Al Capone's brother was a cop just north of here, right?
Something like that, yeah.
I
couldn't tell.
And the mob would come to Omaha to cool down and cool off for a little bit. If things got a little bit too hot in Chicago or Kansas City, they'd come to Omaha to sort of chill for a while.
I heard that.
Yeah, so according to legend, which again the history just fascinates me. And also I mentioned Anna Wilson. There's a restaurant downtown called Wilson and Washburn.
Yes.
Washburn, which is a great little restaurant in an old building that's been repurposed.
Yep.
And found out about the history of Anna Wilson, which I had no idea. She was the madam back in the day. When,
she was.
When they were building the city and with all the railroad business. And basically, when she died, she gave the city $1 million and turned her brothel into the first hospital. Well, the first hospital for communicable diseases, right?
Right.
In Omaha. But her request was that when she was buried under 6 feet of concrete, so the good women of Omaha couldn't dig up her grave.
They would have done that.
Yeah, and by the way, and if you go to as a Prospect Hill, the cemetery there, her gravesite is like a 4-poster bed. It just the history. I'm a nerd when it comes to that sort of stuff. I'm
on the board of trustees for Prospect Hill Cemetery, 3202 Parker Street. We're open every day from 8 a.m. to sundown. Please go check out her grave. It's amazing.
And then also the statue of the state senator just next door.
Yes.
That the story on that is another. We don't have to get into that right now, but that's also fascinating. Do they? I know that, like, on special occasions, they do tours at Prospect Hill. Can you do a tour, other than just walking around and seeing the names?
So we're open, again, every day, 8 a.m. to sundown.
Yeah.
At this moment, we're going through a restoration because we got the funds to replace all of our fencing and do some security. So you might, if you pop by anytime, and then this is late 2024 into spring of 2025, you might find some times where you can't get in. So bear with us. But other than that, it's just come walk walk in, just take a tour of the cemetery. It is Omaha's oldest, most historic cemetery with all of our founding friends. It's really got a lot of great.
Yeah, you will see names that you recognize.
Poppleton. All just great stuff.
Many of the
Byron
street
Reed.
names. All the street names are buried there. There at Prospect Hill. Okay, so as we wrap this up, we talked about the history of Omaha, talked about the old homes and that. Is there anything else that we need to know about this? Anything else we need to know about any of these organizations that you're involved with, or about I guess maybe what the future looks like by looking at the past?
Well, that's a good question, and I didn't prepare for it. I would just say that you can move forward and still pay respect to the past, meaning. As an example, we need more housing. We need more apartment buildings. We need to tear old houses down and build something new. But that doesn't mean we have to abandon architecture. It doesn't mean we have to abandon style. It doesn't mean trees. Trees are huge, importantly to me. That's the reason I run this Retree Omaha. It's because trees are more than just an ugly thing that drops leaves in the fall. They bring oxygen, they bring life, they bring energy. Trees are such an important part of our city. So I go on my tangent about trees, but it's all about being aware of your environment. And that we want new things to happen. We want progress to happen, but just with some style and some character. And also, I recommend be involved in your community. Be involved in your neighborhood. Volunteer your time, whatever you can do.
All right, Tim Reeder, let's see, you're on the board of directors of Prospect Hill. You've got Retree Omaha. You've got
Preserve Omaha.
Yeah, Preserve Omaha. Yep, Preserve Omaha, and of course also Better Homes and Gardens, Real Estate, the Good Life,
and Old Omaha Vintage Real Estate Team.
So anyway, I appreciate that, and good seeing you. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you.
And of course, the podcast brought to you by Havana Garage. Havana Garage in the old market, the old market, which one time probably was not going to be there.
Oh, yeah.
You talk about, sort of a tangent here. You talked about rebuilding, but at the same time paying respect to the past.
Mm-hmm.
M's Pub. M's Pub, the tragic fire that burned it down. But if you go in there now, with the exception of the bathrooms being more accessible, you go there now, you wouldn't know the difference.
I know.
It's incredible. It's incredible. I've got a friend actually that lives in the condos above, and they're great, and they're all new, but they're historic at the same time.
That was a great example of a really well done restoration.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm talking about the old market. I'm talking about Havana Garage, and I'm talking about make sure you like, you subscribe, you follow us so that we can you never miss one of the podcasts, because every week there's somebody different, something new, something unique about not only Omaha but the entire Midwest, or just everyday people with interesting stories to tell. Thanks for joining us on Becca's Talking.